AV Shop Talk, Episode 15.
Podcasting from Boston, Massachusetts and Los Angeles, California, this is AV Shop Talk. Covering the latest audiovisual trends and emerging technologies, this is where the AV pros come to talk shop. With your hosts, Nate Schneider and Jason Griffin.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of AV Shop Talk. Jason Griffin here. So happy to be with you. Joined, of course, by Nate. Nate, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well on this Wednesday evening.
Yeah, so we were talking before the show. I heard you had a little car trouble recently.
Yes. Unfortunately, the car broke down. Oh man, about a week ago. Was left stranded on the highway, and it was not a pleasant experience, but I survived. And actually, a state trooper really helped me out. It saved me about $200 by giving me a little state trooper special. He put his bumper guard right up to the back of my car and just gave me a little push to a vacant parking lot, so I didn't have to get towed and impounded and all that stuff. So, big shout out to Massachusetts state troopers right here.
Yeah, there you go. And there is a technology tie-in here.
There is, because the 2005 Altima finally bit the dust. The motor was completely blown, but we ended up getting a 2012 Camry, which I am very happy with. It has Bluetooth. Now, I know I sound like yeah, Nate, Bluetooth, but it's like I've never had a good experience with Bluetooth. They just don't work. They don't sync right. It doesn't sound right. It drops, when you're trying to listen to music, it doesn't, it cuts out. I've never had a good experience. The first 2 days, man, driving to work in this Camry with the Bluetooth synced up and everything, it's been awesome. It's been life-changing.
So this is your Bluetooth revelation, huh?
This is my Bluetooth revelation. I know I'm late to the game, and I probably should know this because I do a tech podcast, but it's like now I'm experiencing it, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Pretty nice. Yeah, and it's certainly a technology that in a very different context, but is catching hold in the home automation and smart home market like wildfire right now, and Bluetooth Low Energy is a big deal for anybody who follows the smart home and home automation.
I heard about Bluetooth LE actually in the Home Tech podcast, and the potential of like next generation Bluetooth stuff I think is mind blowing. I think maybe I had bad experiences with some earlier iterations. I think now it's probably at a happy place, and I think in the future it's going to be awesome. Definitely
not going anywhere. Well, this is an episode that we've been excited to share, and actually we've been kind of planning on this one for a while. We're going to talk immersive audio, 3D audio, some people call it, or immersive sound. There's a number of terms for it, but definitely been in the news lately with the release of DTS:X, which was just released on April 9th. We're sitting here recording this a few days after that, and we had Chris Boylan on. He is the editor and co-founder of Big Picture, Big Sound, which is a fantastic blog for anybody who enjoys home theater, whether you're a hobbyist or somebody who does it for a living like myself. Great resource, really a lot of valuable insight over at that blog, Big Picture, Big Sound. And we had reached out to Chris a while ago to see if he'd be interested in coming on the show to talk about this topic. And we wanted to kind of time it after the release of DTS:X. And so here we are. And we really look forward to sharing that interview.
Yeah, and one of the big things that Chris helped me understand was the difference between just simple stereo panning and this metadata that's built into some of these object-based technologies. But we'll get more into that in the interview. But before we jump into the interview, there's another big thing that HDMI announced. I got a little update back on the 8th of April. HDMI version 2.0A, the specification for 2.0A was released, and that enables transmission of HDR, high dynamic range formats. Now, this is going to be a big deal. I was just talking with a colleague that went down to NAB this week, and excuse me. I was just talking with a colleague that went down to NAB this week, and he said HDR is definitely going to be a big deal. Might even rival UHD and 4K. So we'll see what happens there, but definitely put HDR on your radar. Research that. Look into what's going on there. A lot of big changes coming up with that.
I have heard some good buzz about HDR. It's obviously a kind of a new technology, and like you said, I've heard people talk about it and said this, as far as the sort of the significance and the impact on the quality of viewing experience, that this rivals, or even a lot of people say surpasses in significance 4K UHD, just because of the quality that it adds to the contrast, and it just makes things look a lot more lifelike. And especially when you get down to kind of the medium or smaller size screens, it's debatable how important like the extra pixels are of UHD, but it doesn't matter what size your screen is. Having HDR could significantly improve the viewing experience. So it's certainly something that anybody working in professional AV should be following, and possibly something that we'll have to look into doing an entire episode on one of these days.
Yeah, definitely. Blacker blacks and whiter whites on an order of magnitude you've never seen before. That's basically, in a nutshell, what HDR is. But with that said, we've got some immersive audio shop talk to get underway. So why don't we go ahead and jump on into the interview?
AV Shop Talk.
Welcome to the AV Shop Talk podcast. I'm pleased to be introducing to our listeners Chris Boylan. He is the editor and co-founder at Big Picture, Big Sound. And in this edition of AV Shop Talk, we're going to be diving into different surround sound technology, specifically this whole idea of 3D surround sound or 3D audio. And we're gonna have Chris give us some insight into that. Chris, thank you for joining us tonight. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. 3D audio, or as it's called, immersive sound, is any of a number of different formats, but they all have one thing in common, and that's they take standard two-dimensional surround sound and they add height. So there are three main flavors of it. There's Dolby Atmos, there's Auro 3D, and the brand new, just announced DTSX. There's also a broadcast format called MPEG-H, which is just starting to come out. We don't know too many details on that one yet.
Okay, so it sounds like there's kind of four big players in this whole immersive sound marketplace right now. Is that what I'm getting from you right now?
Yeah, it is true. If you'd asked me maybe 6 months ago, I would have said there were two.
Oh, wow.
Because so Dolby came into theaters, I think it was May of 2013. May in 2012 with the movie Brave. And then over the next couple of years, they got out into close to 200 movies, and they announced their home solution in June of last year. And around the same time, Auro, who's also in a few theaters, came out with their home solution. And then it was only about maybe 6 months later that DTS said, "Hey, we want to play too," and they started talking about DTSX.
Well, you know what they say, it's the second mouse that gets the cheese, right? So, being first to market doesn't always necessarily mean you're going to be the early bird that gets the worm, right? So,
oh, you're absolutely correct there. And if you guys remember what happened with 7.1 channel sound, Dolby was first to theaters with that. Toy Story 3, I think, was the first movie that came out, and they had another film after film after film. But then when those movies came out on Blu-ray, they were all in DTS HD Master Audio. So just being first doesn't mean you're going to be the one that gets market share. There's a lot of complicated factors that go into that.
Cool. Well, before we get too far down into the details here, I know Jason's chomping at the bit to jump in over on the West Coast there, but I want to find out more about you, Chris. So tell us more about Big Picture, Big Sound. When did that start up, and why did you decide to launch this website?
Oh, well, hey, thanks for asking. So since I was probably about 12, I've been into audio and video gear. I got this component system that I pieced together myself from Leachmere's, I think, up in New England.
Wow.
When my parents bought me a one-brand system, it might have been Fisher, and it lasted all of a day. So I returned it, and then I bought little components, and I got like a used turntable, and I got a receiver that was probably in my parents' basement. I bought a nice pair of speakers, though, and then ever since that, I had the bug, and I was just like buying new components and upgrading and trying to get the best possible sound. I mean, at one point, my sister's little blue portable turntable was like the best audio component that we owned in the family. But I put some silly putty under that, and it sounded better. So then, we since then I've just been, I've had the upgrade bug, and it's been a hobby. So around maybe 2000 or so, I started writing for Steve Rockland. He's got a high-end site called enjoythemusic.com. And it's two-channel. It's a stereo kind of, geeky site for rich people and people who like tube amps. And I was trying to convince him to launch a home theater related site, like a multi-channel site. And he's like, yeah, we're going to do something like that. And then I talked to my friend Joe, who's a movie guy who had already written about 400 movie reviews. And he's like, hey, what do we need him for? So in 2005, Joe and I launched Big Picture, Big Sound, coming up on 10 years, actually, next month.
Wow.
And since then, Joe's handled most of the movie side of things. I've handled the electronics side of things. And we've brought on a lot of freelancers, had some full-time for a while, and been growing the traffic ever since, and trying to stay in touch with the latest movies, the latest music, the latest technology to make it all work.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I definitely enjoy the site and definitely pop in periodically. I think you guys put out great content, and really for anybody who's listening who's not familiar with the site, if you're into home theater at all, it's certainly one of the one of the primary resources that I consider. Being a home theater, a residential guy myself, I've been really excited to have you on, Chris. I think that immersive audio is really an exciting topic. I'm actually managing a pretty large scale installation right now in the residential market here that has elected to use Oro. So I'm actually curious to see that in action, and we should have that theater up and running here within the next couple of months. So
that's an interesting choice. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth between Atmos and Oro, and obviously I can't divulge who the client is, but he's
sure.
Needless to say, he's big in
it's
Hollywood.
Arnold. I know it's Arnold.
He's a big Hollywood guy, and he basically was kind of wooed by Barco, and so I know Barco and Oro kind of have a relationship, and maybe this kind of segues into like my first question, which is sort of a three-part question, and I'll let you kind of take it and dissect it the way you want. But maybe you can talk about the three big players, Dolby Atmos, Oro 3D, and now, of course, DTS-X, and maybe just give us like the 30,000 foot view of each one of those technologies and kind of the sort of high-level methodology that they're using to approach the concept of immersive sound.
Oh, absolutely. So Oro has been working on their solution for quite a while. I think they might have been in theaters around the same time as Dolby, and their home solution came out maybe just after or just before, depending on whether you ask Dolby or you ask Oro. And theirs is based on the standard channel approach. So, you've got 5.1, you got 7.1. They've got an 11.1 solution, and they've got a 9.1, I think. But the layout of their channels is a little different than the other two. They've got the 5 or 7 that go around on the floor. They've got 4 elevated speakers that are typically done actually a high wall, right almost at the ceiling, but not quite the ceiling. And then they've actually got an additional layer of height at the very top called the Voice of God speaker. So because they've got that layering and they've got really that hemisphere, which I know we're going to probably talk about the hemisphere of sound later, they can create a really believable and immersive surround sound feeling. They've done demos at trade shows of jets flying overhead, and you're like, whoa, you're like holding onto your seats,
right,
you don't get blown away. But it is a channel-based approach, and what that means is that it's being mixed in the studios for those fixed number of channels. If you have a different number of channels at playback time, then of course the receiver or the processor is going to be able to remap to find out what's available. But it's defined by that maximum, that like 11.1. The other two, both Dolby Atmos and DTS, and the DTS solution was actually called the MDA before it was called DTS-X, and MDA is actually the authoring tool that you can use as well. And what makes those two different is they're object-oriented or object-based. And the difference there is that you've got the same kind of 7.1 bed. You got a standard surround sound bed, but then if you want a sound of like a helicopter to start in the front left, go overhead, and go to the back right of your room, you only store that sound, that one sound, as like a wave file, and then you give it metadata to say where does it start in space and where does it end. So you're actually storing a lot more detail about where the sound is located and its motion through space. And the cool thing about that is that at playback time, when it's rendering it, the decoders are smart enough to say, well, I have a 9.1 system, so I'm going to render it this way. But I have a 32 channel system and I'm going to render it with that much more detail. So as the sound pans around the room, it's really very, very specific where the sound is coming from. And they're maintaining a sound stage on the top part of the room that's really almost as detailed as the sound stage on the bottom.
Right. Yeah, and I really have to say, like, understanding a little bit about the object-based versus the channel-based methodologies, it seems to me like object-based would be an easier environment to, I guess, produce in or author content in, because from what I'm understanding, you really don't have to concern yourself with how many speakers are. You just basically, in the authoring tool, kind of place the sound where you want it to go in sort of a, that working environment, and kind of a lot of the brain power, I guess, maybe happens at the decoder when you're actually playing back the content. Like, as far as the production environment goes, working with something like Oro or something like Atmos or DTSX, how does that sort of ease of production and the delivery of the content play into kind of the, I guess, the format war that we're sort of, I guess, seeing shape up between these different technologies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've seen the authoring tools for Dolby and DTS. I haven't seen the authoring tools for Oro, although I imagine they're fairly similar. And they're done with a series of Pro Tool extensions and Pro Tool plugins. So you're looking, and if you're an audio mixer, you're used to seeing where the sound is in space, and now you've basically just got an extra coordinate of height. So you've got X, Y, and Z, and you're mapping where the sound starts and where it goes in that three-dimensional sound stage. And then with MDA, at least, which is the DTS authoring tool, it can output that in a number of different formats. I believe it can output in Oro 3D. I know for a fact it can output in DTS, of course, X, and it can output in the IMAX immersive sound format, which is a 12-channel proprietary system. Mm-hmm. So DTS's approach, and what they just announced last week, is that they want to get this authoring tool into as many different sound studios as possible. And they're presenting it as, hey, it's an open format, it's an open tool that will allow you guys, the studios, to create immersive sound in whichever format you choose. But once you've stored that as a master, then then the world is your oyster, right? You'll be able to create this Dolby Atmos output. You'll be able to create DTSX. You'll be able to create Oro or IMAX, depending on the particular theater you're delivering it to, or the partnerships that you as a studio have made.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the physical installation side, a lot of our listeners are professional systems integrators and home theater guys like myself.
Right.
Are you really? I think it's important to understand. Are you really forced to pick, if you're designing a theater? Can you build a theater with hardware and a speaker layout that could theoretically accommodate both Oro as well as like an object-based system, or do you really kind of have to make that decision up front? Like, I'm going to go with Oro, or I'm going to go, on the other side of that coin.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the one that a lot of people are asking now, and they've been waiting for white papers from DTS, et cetera. I think if you ask the individual manufacturers, or the licensors, right, like Dolby or Oro or DTS, they're probably going to recommend that their ideal placement is going to be a little different than what the others will recommend. Mm-hmm. DTS was actually a little bit different. When they came out with their format, and they knew they were already behind a couple, they said that they would work with any existing immersive audio speakers. And in terms of optimizing it for the DTS environment, they use something called speaker remapping, which is built into the DTSX engine. So they are very specifically saying, if you've got Oro, we will work with the Oro speaker layout. If you've got Dolby, we'll work with the Dolby speaker layout. Where it's going to be a little trickier is that Dolby, in their infinite wisdom and their consumer oriented outlook, and I'm not being sarcastic here, they actually do want to get adoption high. They came out with something called the Dolby Elevation Module, which is a speaker that bounces sound off the ceiling. And they've got, I think, a notch filter in there, and they've got some processing that makes you hear the sound first from the ceiling, not from the back speakers. So there's probably some time delay happening with the main channels to try to get these sounds to line up properly, and some other kind of secret sauce in there. So my feeling is that it's very unlikely that the Dolby Atmos, the ones that bounce sound off the ceiling, will work with Oro or will work with DTS. But that's not the only way you can do Dolby. Of course, you can do discrete ceiling speakers as well. They just created this whole idea of the elevation module because they wanted to increase adoption for,
Okay.
So that
they're basically creating that to kind of ease the adoption for somebody who maybe doesn't want to cut into their living room and run a new speaker.
Yeah, for people who don't want to run a lot of wires through their walls and ceilings and install new speakers up top.
So you just have to like slide the coffee table over to the side when it's movie time or something?
Well, you don't even have to. The elevation modules typically are either built into the tower speaker or into a bookshelf speaker.
Interesting.
Or they're they're separate modules to sit on top. There's a system I'm testing right now that's all KEF, and it's a wonderful sounding system. And the R70, I think they're called, elevation modules just sit on top of the standard towers. They bounce the sound off the ceiling, and it sounds incredible. I mean, it really sounds great. It first sounded very bad because I have plaster ceilings that have a little bit of texture to them. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, my basement is my cave. So when I put a bunch of plywood panels on the ceiling, my wife didn't even, look twice. And with that plywood right above each of the towers, the sound just locked into place because it really requires a flat, reflective surface for it to work properly.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like it's a bit of a gray area right now as far as like, if you're designing a room, do you really need to pick one? Really, it's kind of like in an ideal situation, of course, the manufacturer is going to say, yes, you need to design your room for Dolby Atmos. Like it's Atmos or it's not.
Right.
But in the real world, we've got other considerations, obviously. I've heard you use the term MDA a couple times. Right. As I've been kind of researching immersive audio, I've come across this term, and I was a little bit confused, like what the relationship was between MDA and DTS. Like, is MDA just a general term that describes, the broader category? Can you kind of shed some light on that for me?
Sure. I think 3 or 4 years ago, DTS acquired a company called SRS Labs. SRS makes a process called WOW that enhances MP3 files and makes them sound better. And they have a lot of, a simulated surround that was built into televisions. I'm sure you probably heard of them, and it used to be fairly big. The SRS brand is pretty much gone now because, DTS purchased it and kind of, incorporated that into their own product. So the SRS MDA format, which is an object-oriented, object-based sound philosophy and platform, was acquired from SRS, and it was incorporated into the DTS suite. And then it just became, the authoring tool became DTS MDA Creator. So the term, I think it's multidimensional audio, is a name that was coined by SRS and is now owned by DTS, but they're presenting that as an open standard that they're opening up the IP that other people can use it. And particularly the authoring tool, they're trying to make that as easy as possible for studios to get it. So as I mentioned earlier, the DTS MDA Creator tool can output sound in a lot of different immersive audio formats. And most recently, we heard actually at the launch event for DTS-X that Marvel is using it to create the IMAX immersive sound mix for the Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Now, I got to jump in here for a minute.
Sure.
You mentioned this creator tool, which I'm actually very interested to find out how it works and maybe learn some more about it. Maybe reach out to some folks I know in the mastering industry that would have actually mastered things in surround like this before. But when you mentioned something about the metadata, so the big difference is, if I'm hearing this all correctly, is Oro and older formats, traditional 5.1, 7.1, were channel based. And then Atmos comes to the table, DTS-X comes to the table, they're object based. So they're doing, if you will, something fancy, some sort of voodoo, some sort of processing where they can accomplish these object based sounds without using discrete channels. And I think you mentioned metadata. Is this something different than, stereo pan information where you've got, a 2-channel system and you've got, pan information where something's panned, certain percentage to the left or certain percentage to the right? When you say metadata, I'm trying to wrap my head around what that actually means.
Okay, well, I'll try to describe it. Metadata is a generic term. It's data that describes data. So it's instructions or code in some way that accompanies a piece of data to give you the context about that data. When you talk about stereo panning information, there's no extra layer. Basically, if you have a 2-channel system and something sounds like it's coming from the left, then if you look at the physical tape, right, there's a section of the tape that has the left left channel, and there's a section of the tape that has the right channel, and most of the sound is coming from that left channel information. I mean, say like the sound in that channel is maybe at 30 dB, while the sound in the right channel is coming at 10 dB, and that's what gives you the illusion that it's coming from somewhere on the left, right? There's no other information that's stored there. They only have those two channels, left and right, that create the entire soundstage from extreme left to center to right.
Right. Okay.
So when you go to another surround-based system, when you have more channels, then you can get a little more precise with how, where things are located in space. So if you have 7.1, then the amount of channels that you have at your disposal increases. So now you can place something behind the listener. You can place something next to the listener. You can place something, at 45 degrees in front of the listener, just based on having a relative amount of sound in each one of those channels, right? But you're still in that channel-based system where it's just, if it's 7.1, there's only 7 channels of information that only have a recording, like the equivalent of a WAV file or something that's encoded into that channel. So anytime you're building something that sounds like it's coming from not exactly from one speaker, it means that sound is partially in that one speaker and partly in the speaker next to it. So then it sounds like it's in between those two speakers.
And it sounds like this can be dynamic too, so that, based on your specific system, this can adjust on the fly and have this position information in the metadata kind of be specifically configured to, whatever speakers you have and whatever locations you have them. Is that also part of it that I'm hearing? Or
Oh yeah, absolutely. So any object-oriented or object-based approach, or at least the ones that they're using now for audio, do have a standard channel base. So they've got 7.1 that lays the foundation for the surround sound stage, right? Yeah. So it's really just the sounds that have some kind of a height information. They're above the listener, wherever they are in space, that get stored as objects. And you'll still have you would have the recording that would normally have been mixed in to this final rendered mix in 7.1. You get one little object like a helicopter. That's a perfect example because they use that a lot in Atmos, or a jet that's flying over. That is not put into the 7.1 mix. It's stored on another track, if you want to call it that. So now instead of it being 7.1, it's 7.1 plus this extra track. But associated with that track is the information that says start this front left of the room, fly overhead, and then fade out in the back right of the room. So you've got that same. If you listen to that track on its own, it would just be the sound of a helicopter, uniform in volume, and just basically on repeat. And what defines how quickly it's going to fade and how fast it's going to take, or how long it's going to take to travel across the room, is a little bit of code that says start here at this time, increase the volume by this percentage by this time, and then fade it back out at this time in this location. So it's a set of XYZ coordinates. It says start here, end there, and then that goes into the actual mix. At playback time, a system says, okay, I only have 2 height speakers. So what I'm going to have to do for this overhead flying sound is start in the front left in the top in this speaker, and then fade toward the back, but I'm actually going to end in the right surround speaker because I don't have a height channel back there. But it renders it the best way that it possibly can, given the existing speakers and the speaker layout in the room.
Gotcha.
It's fascinating that we're at a point with consumer electronics that sort of rendering can happen just in real time there. I just find that really interesting. It actually calls to mind something I was reading about DTSX, and unfortunately the name is kind of escaping me right now, and hopefully maybe you can chime in. There was something I was reading about where there's going to be a tool on like the viewer side, at least theoretically, where a consumer can kind of go in and basically tweak like how objects are treated relative to one another as they're listening. So the example that I was reading was about like if you were theoretically watching a football game in immersive audio, you could sort of dial in your experience to, place yourself on the visitor sideline or turn up the dialogue on the field and turn down the commentary. And it was talking about kind of the greater amount of flexibility that end users are going to have to dial in their mix. Do you know much about that? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I do, and it's actually either DTSX or Dolby Atmos can do this. Once you store a sound as an object, instead of being hard-coded into that mix, then you have full control over it. Not just the level that it's at, but whether it's in the mix at all. So that is one of the demos they do. They'll say this is like a football broadcast, and MPEG-H may do this. This is the immersive audio format for broadcast. You may be able to at playback time of this broadcast game, you may be able to just take out the commentator entirely because it's just an object. You press a button, no commentary. You just hear the crowd, you hear the plays. You may be able to hit another button and you've got mics on the coach and he's calling out the plays. So when you're in an object-oriented environment, all that becomes possible. No one is really talking about actually broadcasting things that way, but it makes for a hell of a demo.
Yeah.
What DTS did that was different than so far what Dolby's done or OX is they said, well, we get a lot of requests from our customers to be able to adjust the dialogue. You know, if you're watching a movie late at night or you're kind of getting on in years and you don't hear so well, wouldn't it be great if you wouldn't have to turn off the entire movie just to hear the dialogue a little better? And there are solutions for that, but they're all based on EQ, basically, right? And maybe what's in the center channel if it's a multi-channel mix. DTS has said we're going to give the studios the ability to create a object group called dialogue and put it out in the mix like that. You play it back in regular 7.1 or even in 9.1.4, you're going to hear it exactly the way the director intended. But if you want to go in and say, I need the dialogue a little bit higher, it will adjust the dialogue without affecting the rest of the mix.
That's really interesting. I actually am going to have to dive in and research MPEG-H a little bit. To be honest, I really sort of unfamiliar with that. I guess it kind of begs the question, like, if you could look into your crystal ball, how far into the future do you think we're going to be before we really start to see broadcasts in immersive audio?
Oh boy. Yeah, I think it's going to be a few years. I mean,
before or after UHD though? That's the thing. Which will come first?
Honestly, I think it'll come with it. When we have true broadcast of UHD, not just streaming or content that's stored on a hard drive somewhere, that is what MPEG-H is trying to do, is become the immersive audio standard for UHD broadcasts.
Yeah, interesting.
So it could happen. I think it's not going to happen soon, but I don't want to be proven wrong, so I'm not going to give you an exact year.
Yeah.
All right, fine. 2019, first immersive audio broadcast.
Oh, you heard it here first, folks. We're going to write that down. We're going to make sure we bug you about it.
Yeah, exactly. So
and when it happens, you can call me for football tips too, because
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think that it's all fascinating stuff. I kind of want to zoom out a little bit here to, we're kind of starting to run up against our time a little bit. More from a high level, I'm curious to hear your opinion on this. Is this a format war? Are we looking at sort of competing technologies where we have kind of a zero-sum game, and at the end of the day, like Dolby Atmos's win is DTX loss? Or is there room in the market for, these three different players to all exist and thrive?
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely a format war among the companies that are proposing the different standards. But as far as the consumer is concerned, as long as they didn't just buy a Dolby Atmos receiver last year that isn't upgradable, then I think the formats can happily coexist. I mean, right now, you're putting in high-end systems for customers. All of these systems have Dolby True HD and DTS and PCM decoding. No matter what format it's in, if it's 7.1, they can play it back. Right. So the fact that DTS did happen to steal a huge amount of the Blu-ray market, like literally, I think it's close to 90% of the lossless audio mixes on Blu-ray or in DTS HD Master Audio. That doesn't matter to the consumer because they bought a receiver that can handle all of them. So they just go and they buy whatever movie they like. And it doesn't matter to them that, Warner chose Atmos over, Lionsgate, also using Atmos, but maybe some other company who is yet to be announced yet uses, DTSX. As long as they have a processor that supports all of them and a speaker configuration that can be used with all, which I'm confident, we'll be able to have. The consumer wins. So it's not the same as a Blu-ray versus HD DVD format war, in which case if you back the wrong horse, you got a bunch of software you can't use anymore.
Right.
In this case, it's not going to work out like that. They're all trying to become the standard for immersive audio. Whichever one wins, as long as studios start putting it on any format, then I think the consumer wins.
Yeah. I have one quick follow-up question to that, and I know we were exchanging some emails before the show, and we don't really know. There doesn't really exist adoption statistics. We can't go out and say X percentage of consumer electronic AVR manufacturers are adopting this technology versus that technology. But maybe just, again, from a high level, do you get a general a feeling about AVR manufacturers and which technologies they're getting behind, or are they generally kind of placing their bets on all three right now?
I would say because of the head start that Dolby Atmos has, they have the highest saturation right now. They have, you see Onkyo, Integrif, Marantz, Denon, the D&M brands, Pioneer. There's several. Yamaha's got some products that have it. Because they were out first, there are more products that have it. But on last Friday, when DTS made their formal announcement, they mentioned many of the same brands as supporting DTSX. In some cases with very specific models. In fact, there's two models that came out already. There's a Marantz preamp processor and a Denon receiver that will be software upgradable to DTSX in May or June.
Okay.
So you're getting a lot of companies that are supporting both formats. The one that we're not seeing as much yet really is Oro. My Marantz receiver that I'm testing right now did get a firmware upgrade. Actually, it was I think it cost $50 for customers to do the upgrade, but it became Oro 3D enabled after the product came out. And that's kind of the real cool thing about components now is that, if someone wants to upgrade to a new format, in many cases, they just, connect it to the internet and they get the upgrade.
Unless it's HDCP 2.2, but we will get into that in another episode.
You're right. Yeah. Actually, I have a lot to say about that too, but not right now.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, trust me, that's a whole nother episode.
Right.
So,
you're
okay,
right.
what's your favorite?
Even though it is software upgradable, it doesn't mean that every receiver that has Atmos will be upgradable. Out of the ones that are on the market now, only two were announced as being upgradable. It was the top of the line Denon and the top of the line Marantz, and that was it.
So
everybody else, time to buy a new receiver.
Gotcha. So as we kind of wrap up this episode here, I got to ask you I know you've been testing different components, speakers, receivers. What is your favorite flavor of this new immersive sound that's coming out right now?
The one that I can play at home. I have more experience so far with Atmos because there are 11 titles on the market. They're actually movies that came out in theaters here. Mm-hmm. My Oro experience is a little more limited. All I have from them is a couple of demo discs because there really aren't any commercial Blu-rays you can buy right now that are encoded in Oro. I will say that the demos that I've heard for both Oro 3D and DTSX are as impressive as Dolby Atmos, for sure. I mean, adding that height element and doing it in a way that's, discrete, that's an actual channel, whether it's an object or a hard-coded, hard-mixed channel, makes the surround sound stage just so much more immersive. Movies like Gravity, which was a Dolby Atmos movie that is out on Blu-ray now in Dolby Atmos, it's a whole different film in Dolby Atmos. The specificity of the sound, hearing the conversations between mission control and the astronauts coming from pinpoint in space above your head and tracking right across your ceiling and back down to the front left. It's amazing. When we first got 3D, of course, I had everybody over and say, hey, watch this 3D movie. It's great. And they're like, glasses? But when I take people downstairs and play them Dolby Atmos, they're like, whoa.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a good point. I think that, the whole 3D viewing experience kind of, it didn't catch on. I think it was a solution looking for a problem, so to speak. And I feel like, what I've heard about 3D audio and what limited, demos that I've seen at trade shows and things like that, it strikes me as a very big deal and something that really changes the experience. And it sounds to me like you would agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the most exciting thing we've seen happen in consumer audio, at least home theater, for since the lossless codecs came out. When Blu-ray and HD DVD first came out, and that's 8 or 9 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty exciting.
Cool. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate you taking the time to come on and discuss immersive sound with us. I think it's an exciting topic and certainly one that anyone into home theater or professional systems integration should be paying attention to. Chris, if anyone listening to our show wanted to connect with you and learn more, or maybe ask a follow-up question or two, what would be the best way for them to do that?
There's a few ways you can do that. We, of course, have a Facebook page, facebook.com/bigpicturebigsound. We also have we're pretty active on Twitter. The Twitter handle is BPBS. It's BPBS. And if anybody wanted to email me directly, Chris@bigpicturebigsound.com. What I like to do is if I get questions in via email that seem like other people might want to know the answer to it, I'll usually write it up as an actual Ask the Expert topic and publish that on the site. We don't reply to every single person who sends in a question because it actually, the traffic is fairly high at times. But any intelligent question, and even some of the dumb ones, will be answered.
Sorry
Awesome.
if I asked some dumb ones in this episode.
No, there was great questions, Nate. Great.
Great. Well, we enjoyed having you on, and if we're still cranking these shows out in 2019, I think we'll have to have you back on, right?
Yes. Well, I revel in the glory of the immersive sound over broadcast.
All right, Chris. Well, we'll let you go. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, just wanted to thank Chris Boylan again for taking some time out of his day to come on to the podcast. And, that was a very interesting interview for me. Definitely learned a lot about the 3D technologies or the immersive audio technologies. And one of the big things we kind of glossed over was just the content issue, right? Like, there's not a whole lot of content out there. I mean, Chris's favorite of the flavors of this immersive audio was Atmos, because there's 11 titles available. So he can actually, enjoy that today. Not so with some of the other technologies that are out there. But, I don't have a favorite yet. I haven't tested them all out yet. But I don't know. What's your take on it, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, like you alluded to, it's really, we're still very early in the adoption curve here, and it kind of remains to be seen what studios are going to get behind what technologies, if we are going to have all three of these technologies sort of mature and thrive, or if, one or two of them is going to have to fall by the wayside. I think that really the battle is going to be about content, and it's going to be about production. And speaking of production, there was one story I wanted to kind of close the show on, and we spend a lot of time here on AV Shop Talk talking about audio visual as a profession, right? And we talk about the importance of a quality viewing experience. This whole interview, right, ties into like immersive sound and its impact in the home theater. And this story I saw recently, Nate, are you a Game of Thrones fan?
I know it's a cultural phenomenon right now. I have not actually seen an episode of Game of Thrones yet, but I hear about it all the time. Are you?
It's a great show. It's a great show. We love it. I'm not typically into these kind of the fantasy genre, but it's a great show. We really enjoy it. And a new season of Game of Thrones just started this past weekend as we sit here and record this. And there was a story that broke about these massive leaks where the first 4 episodes of the season had leaked out online, and they got episode 1 got downloaded like 1 million times in the first 18 hours, and that kind of stuff is going to happen. It's unfortunate, but it's just a reality nowadays. The one thing I saw that I got to say as a home theater guy did kind of depress me was that you're familiar with Periscope, right?
Oh yeah, Periscope, Meerkat, those are the two like new social video sharing platforms.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who may not know, it's essentially like, and it gives you the ability to live stream from the video camera on your phone. So imagine like FaceTime, where you've got, a video stream coming out of your camera that you're chatting with a relative or something, only instead of having one relative on the other end of that call, it's going up onto a server, and anybody in the world can, go on Periscope and find it and watch your stream. And apparently this was like rampant with the Game of Thrones episode, and people were streaming it on Periscope. And it just is kind of like, I just feel like we've reached a new low. Having spent some time on Periscope and seeing the sort of the quality of the video and the audio and these feeds, and people just holding the camera, it just kind of makes me smack my head. And it reminds me of, when people used to go into the movie theaters, right, and take the little camcorder, and that was like pirated content. And so I just think that it's a little bit depressing for a home theater enthusiast, and even for anybody who's just into audio visual, that this is kind of where things have gone.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't, the whole bootlegging thing just never really made sense to me. Like, you want to have a good viewing experience. You don't want to watch, I don't know, maybe there's some hardcore fans out there that just want to see shaky, live streamed video.
Yeah,
via,
who knows?
Via
Well,
Periscope,
anyways, hopefully with initiatives like HBO Now, which people can now get access to HBO shows without having, to have a cable, expensive cable bill. Maybe that'll kind of allow people to watch it without having to do these sort of shaky, just kind of trashy ways of viewing it. But in any event, I kind of wanted to touch on that, because I do think that, talking about a technology like immersive sound and 3D audio, it gets me excited about home theater. And as somebody who does this every day, it's easy for me to get sort of bogged down into like the business of executing high-end home theaters. But when we get into a a new technology like immersive sound, you get a guy on like Chris Boylan to chat about it, it just kind of gets you pumped up again on home theater.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Nate. Well, really enjoyed the episode. Anybody listening, really hope you kind of took something away from it, learned a thing or two. If you're enjoying the show, certainly let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes. We would really appreciate that. Stop by the website at avshoptalk.com. Leave us a comment, or reach out on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you at avshoptalk.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. We will talk shop with you in the next episode of AV Shop Talk. The AV Shop Talk podcast is produced independently by Jason Griffin and myself, Nate Schneider. Musical contributions have been provided by Colin Owens. Voiceover contributions have been provided by John Perry. For more information, visit avshoptalk.com/episode 15. We do apologize for the snap, crackle, and pops you heard throughout this episode. One of the downsides of recording Skype interviews. But we thought the content was great. We loved having Chris come on there, so hopefully you'll bear with us with those snap, crackles, and pops. And we will continue to strive for excellence in future recordings.